and look at what we have here to talk about today. I picked up 3 of the Eye Illusion eyeshadow duos from Patrick Ta to answer the big question in the series I do here on my channel. Do you actually need it? Which is a series that I do on my channel about viral makeup products, especially ones that have sold out. All 3 of these shades currently are sold out on Sephora's website. You might still be able to get them on Patrick Ta's site. But essentially, I'm going to be talking about this formula in specific, my experience with these textures, the way they look on the eyes, and then also compare them to other products that are on the market that you might already have in your collection that you might have been looking at to really answer the big question, are these one of a kind? I think the answer you will find interesting. And if you're new to my channel, hi, my name's Amanda. I am a huge lover of eyeshadow, but in specific, I am a huge obsessor, I'm gonna say, of really sparkly, wet-looking, sparkly top coats, sparkly eyeshadows that give that really wet, glossy effect on the eyes. I've done countless videos on my channel about these kinds of eyeshadows, which has really prepped me for this video, I'll say that. So each of these retail for $42. That was quite a shock for a lot of people, and I think that that has kind of contributed a little bit to the virality of these eyeshadows because it does kind of beg that automatic question, like, what about these? I'm sorry, my hair is like really irritating me today, and I'm not sure what to do with it. The question immediately pops into your head, 2 eyeshadows, $42, could it possibly be worth it? I think Patrick Ta is ultimately running into this issue because of the price point of the palettes that were already released. It's just a better bang for your buck when you're getting a full eyeshadow palette rather than just 2 singles. But I think what's really important to note here is that this is a completely different texture, a completely different formula that was not present in those palettes. So now whether or not these truly cost more to produce is obviously, for me, anything coming from me is going to be speculation. But I'm gonna say my gut is saying absolutely, just because of the experience of these eyeshadows versus the experience of the Patrick Ta eyeshadow palette. Now, I don't even have it anymore because I decluttered it. So if that gives you like any information about how I felt about it, I thought that the mattes were just fine and the sparkles were just meh. They really did feel like your everyday pressed glitter, which is, for me, it doesn't do it. It doesn't do it for me anymore. Like, the everyday pressed glitter, to me, is a little bit boring at this point, and those kind of translated to me as a little bit boring. However, this formula that Patrick Ta has come out with, these are anything but boring. Now, something important to note is that all of these are a slurry formula, which means that they come out into the pan as a cream and then they're baked. So this is a drier baked formula across the board, but the shine does differ depending on each shade. I wanted to first start off with the actual texture comparison because I have not tried another texture like these eyeshadow duos from Patrick Ta, except with the Pat McGrath eyeshadow palettes. And in specific, if you guys have tried any of her special shades, which are these very dry pressed glitters that are incredibly wet, that is the closest formula that I have found to the Patrick Ta. Now, I actually realized while I was preparing for this video that there's a big possibility that I decluttered my Pat McGrath eyeshadow palettes, and I am kind of freaking out. If you guys don't know, I'm in the process of moving. This is the one that I decluttered, and the other 2 that I wanted to keep are MIA. But ultimately, if you have tried that gold from the Utopian Dream palette from Pat McGrath, or you have tried the really wet, bright white sparkle from the Divine Rose palette from Pat McGrath, you are getting a pretty similar thing when you try these eyeshadows. And we'll get into specifics again in a second, but each one of these palettes, as far as texture, is a little bit different. But each one of these does have at least one shade with that kind of special, very dry pressed glitter formula. Now, let's start with Still at the Club, which is the eyeshadow on my eyes right now. This bottom shade right here, this kind of chocolatey brown, this is more like a kind of suede satin to metallic formula. It doesn't have a lot of shimmer, wet glitter throughout it on its own. But then on top, this taupe, and it is the wet glitter that I have on my eyes today, this alone is one of the best eyeshadows that I have ever used, hands down. And it's not just because of the color, which the color is kind of, it is my kind of color. If you're familiar with my channel, these shades, I mean, we'll get into it with all the shades that I have in front of me, but these shades are pretty consistently my favorite shades that I own in my collection. But this is kind of beyond a lot of the ones that I have tried, and it is because of the reflection. What Patrick Ta essentially did was take the Pat McGrath special shade formula and did it with even finer glitter. So what that actually was able to do is create an even more wet effect, and in my opinion, something that's more wearable as well. The glitters themselves are thinner, and it doesn't look like you have just a lot of individual glitters on the eyes. It really does create that mirror-like reflection that you are looking for when you want a wet eyeshadow look. You can kind of immediately feel it in the finger, that difference between an eyeshadow like this comparatively to the Pat McGrath. Now, I will say when Pat McGrath came out with the Utopian Dream palette, she did start to tweak the special shades a little bit, in specific these, and she unfortunately, in my opinion, made them worse. They don't really hold up on themselves the same way anymore. They're not that kind of like dry baked formula. They just do feel like more run-of-the-mill pressed glitters now. I'm not sure if that's going to change with future palettes, but it does make me happy that I have access to this now from Patrick Ta, so I'm still able to get something really wet, super reflective, and even finer than the ones from Pat McGrath. Though Patrick Ta has some releases within the whole collection that do feel more mid-range, this formula feels very luxury to me, and the price point lines up with it. Answering the big question, is it worth it? I think ultimately I can never answer that question for you all. I have incredibly expensive eyeshadows in front of me, including ones from Pat McGrath and just general single shadows from like Dior. This is in a league of its own. And I think Patrick Ta ultimately deserves a little bit of credit here. For me, I completely understand the frustration with a eyeshadow like this being so expensive because it becomes inaccessible. And that's why I'm going to talk about a lot of other eyeshadows that are really beautiful at a variety of price points. But the only texture that I have found similar to this is within a $125 palette. So I think it's just important to put into context. There's no denying that this is an incredibly expensive product. And once I tried the formula, there's also, to me, no denying that the formula is of good quality. Still at the Club is what is on my eyes today, and I know that this is going to be in Best of Beauty for 2024. It's an all-in-one, absolutely stunning, wet, taupey, glossy eye. And I have others, absolutely, but this one is by far the most reflective. I'm gonna go into my next favorite, which might actually be a surprise to you, or, you know, at least it was for me. Also, I'm gonna open my Coke Zero. I needed that. This is the duo Do You Know Who I Am? And let me tell you, after trying this, yes, I know who you are, Patrick Ta. Because this is fantastic. In fact, I would say if you are not sure which one of these to pick up, and you do lean towards shades like this, these warmer sparkles, for me personally, I know this is gonna sound crazy, I would go with this. Because within the Still at the Club duo, I don't know why I think I keep forgetting the names because they're also like similar for some reason to me. This only has one wet sparkle top coat and just like a really pretty metallic shadow, whereas this duo is essentially like two special shades. And both of them are absolutely incredible. They are so foiled and truly give that molten gold effect. It really does look like liquid gold on the eyes. The deeper gold is definitely warmer and the glitters are finer, which I think it was well played as far as the design of this because you want that as a base shadow. You want that all over the lids, or at least I would. And then this lighter gold is a little bit brighter. It adds this other layer of dimension. The particles are also a little bit bigger, not a super chunky glitter, in my opinion. I will say, if you don't like the look of glitter, none of these eyeshadows from Patrick Ta are really for you. Just a side note, like, because each one of these is a strong glitter, I mean, look at my eyes. There's a lot of glitter going on here. If you don't like that, if you don't like a glitter look, you're not gonna like these. And lastly, we have Talk to My Team. Now, this is the one that I was a little bit on the fence about picking up. And ultimately, this is the one that I was the least impressed with. And yet, I still really like it. You know, if I had gotten this duo for like 30 bucks, I think I would be more happy with the decision of having it, but because it was 42, I think it sets me like there's some sort of threshold that happens in my brain where I'm like, I don't think that this is necessarily worth that. And we'll talk about the reasons why with some of the other shadows, but for me, the main reason is that these are the finest glitters out of the formulas that I have tried. They are very pretty, but they are a little bit more subtle. And this kind of formula feels different than these shadows that we just talked about. Each sparkle does not have as much pigment. The actual shades themselves, I don't think have as much pigment. The glitters are different. They're just different. They feel way more similar to a lot of the wet sparkle shadows that are already on the market. So are they pretty? Yes, but for $42, I would lead you to some of the other ones that I would talk about. Let's get into those other eyeshadows that we're going to talk about. Let's start with Still at the Club. But I don't want to just focus on the shade because I don't think that the shade necessarily is the differentiating factor of this. Again, it is that texture. So I'm just going to talk about a lot of the textures that I have here in front of me. And I would really lead you guys to make a decision about what kind of texture and look you want to go for rather than necessarily the shades because the shades you're going to be able to tell some slight differences here and there, but overall on the eyes they're going to have a pretty similar effect. I think overall the textures are really what is going to make application and the look on the eyes a little bit different. So the first shadow that I wanted to talk about in comparison to the Patrick Ta is Hourglass Smoke. As far as the formula goes, a lot of you are probably familiar with it, but it's essentially a pressed glitter pigment that is incredibly finely milled, and it doesn't feel quite as dry as these Patrick Ta shades do because of the way it's been pressed. It almost does feel a little bit wet to the finger because of the ultra smooth pigments and glitters. And I think that that overall smoothness of glitter is going to make this easier for everyday wear. Just throwing on an eyeshadow, a one and done. It's going to be appropriate for school. It's going to be more appropriate for work. I always like to think of it as like the sophisticated sparkle. I always call it that. And I do think that that is this kind of shade. So if you're just looking for an everyday, slightly wet look taupey eyeshadow which is just really wearable and easy to put on, I think that you might be better off going with Smoke from Hourglass. Now, granted, a single shadow from Hourglass still ain't cheap. All of these are really beautiful taupey glitters, these kind of scattered glitter toppers. I think ultimately, if you want something that is the finest, I would go with the Hourglass Scattered Lights. If that's what you're after, then you definitely do not need the Patrick Ta. Another great option, if you are someone that's like, Amanda, I don't even really want an ultra crazy glitter on my eyes, you could go with something like Dior Beige Mitza. This is one of my favorite eyeshadows of all time. This is certainly a touch warmer than the Patrick Ta, but again, it is a little bit more wearable for every day because the glitters aren't as intense. The shade just consistently performs and looks beautifully. And another plus of a shade like this, because it's a metallic, not necessarily a pressed glitter, you're not going to deal with any fallout that you might with some of these other pressed glitters. It just is really easy for every day. You can also wear it like very sheerly, whereas some of these eyeshadows you really can't. They end up becoming just like a very light glitter rather than, this has more base pigment, so it's a little bit more versatile. So again, if you're looking for just an everyday kind of pretty eyeshadow, you definitely don't need this one from Patrick Ta. Another great example that I wanted to give you guys is the Finest Fleck eyeshadow from Elf in Filthy Rich. This is actually incredibly similar, and I have talked about this, where is it? To Lithium from the Moondust line. And it is also incredibly similar to Wet Pebble as well. All three of these, actually, I'm going to throw in another one, Mink from Victoria Beckham. All of these are very, very similar. Thinnest is probably the Elf, though it does still have a bit of creaminess. And in fact, this shade in particular is incredibly reminiscent to the bottom shade of the Still at the Club duo as far as the texture goes. The shades themselves aren't the same, but the actual textures and the way they look on the eyes is definitely similar. The e.l.f. is incredibly affordable. I think that e.l.f. has created one of the best affordable wet glitters on the market, period, with these. So this is absolutely a great option. Lithium, admittedly, I think is more sparkly than the one from e.l.f. It's a little bit wetter because the glitters are a different color. They do have more variance, but there is still that really cool tone brown, rich, wet pigment. And Wet Pebble, I think, is something between a metallic and a wet glitter. If you want the most like rich pigment on the eyes and you really want that base pigment to show through, or you really need it in order to get a good look, like if you have a deeper skin tone, this might actually be your best option because it has a ton of base pigment right off the bat. The glitters are very fine and pretty. They're not quite as scattered as something like Lithium, as the Patrick Ta are. But again, everyone is looking for something a little bit different. Last one that I wanted to compare it to is again Victoria Beckham Mink. So the packaging is very similar to the Hourglass. I actually consider this to be a similar formula to the Scattered Lights, except creamier and richer. In general, they're going to have more payoff on the eyes. The glitters are incredibly wet and gorgeous. I think for me personally, the closest that you are going to get to the Patrick Ta is the Hypnotizing Pop Shot from Charlotte Tilbury. The color is the most similar. Even the formula is the most similar out of all of these that I've talked about because, oh God, I've put this one through the ringer and it is still not ending. Even the formula is the most similar because it is the driest and clearly the most fragile. Sparkles are the lightest and the most wet. They're like the most cool toned. Like to get close to the Patrick Ta, you really need that very, very bright sparkle mixed with a richer base pigment. And the Charlotte Tilbury has really been able to accomplish that kind of balance. So again, you absolutely do not need, of course, like I've said it multiple times, you don't need the one from Patrick Ta, right? There are a lot of options that are going to look very similar, especially once they're on the eyes. However, if you are a sparkle connoisseur the way that I am, and you really can notice the differentiation between all of these, You really notice texture. You know what kind of textures you like. I really hope that this was helpful. And is this different than the others that I talked about? I think so. Again, it is one of the wettest eyeshadows that I have ever put on my eyes, period. He just really did that. And by the way, we did talk about the Pat McGrath special shadows, and we'll talk more about those in a second. This single shade from Patrick Ta is better than all of the special shades that I've tried from Pat McGrath. I think it's just worth noting that. And honestly, I have tried the gold special shade from Pat McGrath, which is in the Utopian Dream palette, which again, I really hope is returned to me or is actually still in my house. Honestly, if one of my friends has it, I would feel bad even trying to get it back from them at this point. But anyway, I do like this more than those. The glitters in here are finer. You know how so the Pat McGrath glitters, yes, by the way, we are getting into the Do You Know Who I Am alternatives now. You know how the Pat McGrath glitters, when they go onto the eyes, they almost feel like textured. It's not that they hurt on the eyes, but you can feel them going on. And you definitely don't want to be like rubbing your finger with the glitter on your eyes. Like that wouldn't feel great. You can definitely swipe and pat, but like they have grit to them. These do not feel uncomfortable when you're actually putting them onto the eyes because they're finer. They're finer and yet just as insanely sparkly. I'm truly blown away. I did not think that I could ever, ever like such a warm tone eyeshadow until I tried these. There's really just, for me, probably the best warm tone shadows that I've ever used. Other than one shadow, which is Hourglass Ray. Now, here's the thing with Hourglass Ray. It is definitely cooler. It is a neutral shade in general, but it is not nearly as warm toned as the Do You Know Who I Am shade. So already with that, there's just not even really a comparison as far as the shades go. Now, texturally, Ray is incredible. I mean, I would certainly put Hourglass Ray as well as Hourglass Smoke within my top 10 single eyeshadows. Not even a second thought because they are incredible. But they're just different. They're more finely milled. Again, they're more of that sophisticated sparkle. This shade, I think some of you will have something similar in your collection too, especially if you have eyeshadows like Space Cowboy. Space Cowboy, because there is less base pigment to it, you can use this as an eyeshadow with so many other different eyeshadows that you already have. So to give you guys an example, I have the I Need a Warm palette from Natasha Denona, an absolutely beautiful one. I have this shade, which is the shade Push, very, very pretty gold. I can put that out on my hand. I have a nice warm base now. I can take Space Cowboy and put that on top. And I've already created this kind of base shadow look with that very, very wet, bright sparkle on top. And you could certainly do that with a taupe shadow and apply this on top and get something similar to the one from Patrick Ta as well. Really, we're just dealing with pressed glitters here. And again, very similar to the Pat McGrath special shades. The glitters are bigger, but again, because of the quality of them, they're able to sit very thinly on the eyes. And when glitters sit very closely together and thinly pressed on the eyes, that's when you're able to get that really wet effect. So when glitters are chunkier, light kind of refracts back rather than creating that more mirror-like shine. I've talked a lot about the physics of like sparkly glitters and what makes something wet looking before in a lot of my wet looking eyeshadow videos, so I'm not gonna get into that. But that's kind of like the gist of it. All this is to say that these are even more wet looking than something like Space Cowboy. Space Cowboy is gonna be better though, in my opinion, for something every day. I don't think I necessarily want to wear this every day. Shadows like this, they're more of a statement and they're gorgeous. And again, I think they're some of the best eyeshadows that I've tried. If you're looking for an investment piece in your collection, you kind of want to go with something that you're going to use a lot. At least that's my approach to beauty. You know, as far as investment pieces, I like you guys to save and invest in something that you would use a ton, which I can see Space Cowboy being a shade that a lot of people love and use a lot. I have talked about the e.l.f. Finest Fleck Glitter Eyeshadow in Champagne Showers as well. This to me just, it's not even a comparison to the one from Patrick Ta. It is very pretty and it is a very pretty wet sparkle. I think if you're looking for a nice lighter gold kind of champagne, just go with ColourPop Ritz if you want something more affordable. I think it is even prettier than the one from e.l.f. And you know, speaking of the Natasha Denona I Need a Warm palette, you can get a very beautiful wet, sparkly golden look with this, but I would be lying to you guys, and I'm sorry to say this because it's just the truth. I would be lying to you guys if having Do You Know Who I Am, for me personally, makes this like null and void. Like, I know for a fact that when I want to do a warm eye look now, I'm going to reach for this. Or even my new Spice palette from Anastasia. And I think that's because this one isn't even super warm. So, like, I don't know what that says about me. I'm just really trying to be honest with you guys here, rather than say things that are gonna necessarily make you happy. Like, I just want to give you the real nitty-gritty. So honestly, if this is one that you have nothing in your collection like the way I didn't, this truly has felt the most worth it to me. Both shades are incredible on their own, whereas I think the real magic of this is this shade rather than this one. That's just, you know, my opinion about it. Whereas you get two separate, different enough shades that are both stunning. So I also did want to mention that something like Moonstone from Bobbi Brown is, I'm sure, something that people want to compare this to. Bobbi Brown does have that drier texture that the Patrick Ta has, but there's more of a metallic base pigment to the one from Bobbi Brown, which makes the overall effect different. It actually makes the effect of Moonstone a little bit softer. And again, probably better for someone that doesn't necessarily want that true like molten gold look and you want something a little bit lighter and airier. But I did want to quickly mention that I do think that the texture, if you do like that drier texture within your sparkly top coats, this does have that, but the actual effect on the eyes is a little bit different. Now, lastly, let's talk about Talk to My Team, because this one is very, very pretty, but I'm going to give you a few that I would automatically say pick up instead of this. To me, with this one, it feels more cut and dry to me. Also, I have a few products that I forgot to talk about that I'm going to save till the end because I realize that I still need to talk about them, or meant to talk about other alternatives to Do You Know Who I Am? So stay tuned for that in a second. If you have any of the pinkier shades from the Moondust line, whether it is Cosmic Craze or Rebel Star, both of these actually do have a drier texture, but these are getting closer to the formula of Talk to My Team. And for me personally, I think that these are just as beautiful. There is less general base pigment to the ones from Patrick Ta, as I've mentioned before. Really, the only one with a ton of base pigment, the only shadow is this more cocoa brown shade that we were talking about before. But all of the other shades have very little base pigment, at least in the ones that I've picked up. These ones from the Moondust line are incredibly similar once you get them onto the eyes. And another one that is incredibly similar is the Puck, the Half Magic Puck. Like, if you have this, I don't think that you need to pick this one up. The Half Magic is more of a dry texture. Again, it's not like this kind of souffle that is then baked texture. It feels more like you're putting your finger into dry glitter. However, the actual color and the effect once it goes onto the eyes and the kind of lack of base pigment makes it so similar to these. So again, do we have like exact dupes here? No, I don't think so, but But I think that as far as vibe, you could very easily dupe this vibe of Talk to My Team with either of those moon dust shadows that I talked about or the glitter puck from Half Magic. But before I sign off, there were a couple more eyeshadows that I wanted to mention as a possible alternative to Still at the Club. If you are looking for these kind of like taupey, gorgeous looks, but you don't have the mattes to build out a whole look, but you want a little bit more flexibility, you don't just want one eyeshadow, you want like a palette, I wanted to give you guys a couple of options for that. So one, I have the Lorac Noir palette. It's not drugstore, but a lot of these shades are more cool toned, beautiful taupes. So many different wet sparkles here and a lot of mattes. This is definitely a great bang for your buck product. Are the Patrick Ta shadows like a good bang for your buck? No. I mean, they really have like one purpose, which makes it less of a good bang for your buck, you know what I mean? But something like this really is going to give you so many different beautiful looks, and I highly, highly recommend it. I also wanted to talk briefly about the Ethereal Eyes palette from Makeup by Mario. I notoriously am someone that actually doesn't think that this one is worth the money. I know that I'm gonna get questions about it anyway, so I wanted to very quickly mention that these glitter formulas within the Makeup by Mario are very similar to the glitter formula that Patrick Ta has already released within his palettes. It's this kind of like very thin, feels just like a glitter in a pan. And though they scatter very well, I personally, for me, there's just nothing too special about them. I think that the Moondust line has done a better job, and the mattes are very chalky for me. So I know I'm gonna get questions about that. I just wanted to mention it again. And then lastly, the I Need a Nude palette from Natasha Denona. It's one of my favorite palettes of all time. I absolutely love it. And if, again, you want something that you can do more with, you want to spend a little bit more money to be able to get more use and a lot of different kinds of looks, then go with the I Need a Nude palette. For me, it's a no-brainer. If you want a lot of different looks, you want something that you think you're going to use more, there's a good chance that these just aren't going to be for you. But again, it's a little bit harder when we're comparing palettes to singles. It kind of is a little bit like apples and oranges. If you want to save $20 more in your budget and just get the I Need a Nude palette rather than these duos from Patrick Ta, I could definitely see that being a smart decision if you want to really get some use out of your makeup. I don't want to sit and lie to you guys about whether or not these are good. They are beautiful. They are great quality. I love this kind of a taupe because it has a little bit of that purple. Anyway, I really got to sign off here. I know this is going to be a long video. But yeah, my final verdict is, of course you don't need it. But ultimately, I do think that they are very, very unique, and I am super happy to have them. But I want to hear from you guys, and I also want to thank you for watching this video. I know it's probably a long one. I just really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you for subscribing if you would like, and I will see you in my next one.